in negotiations.
Aaron, you know what? That news
Take
conference with our Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is starting right now, so let's listen in. Thank you so much.
And its enablers. In the Second World War, D-Day marked the historic beginning of a campaign with our allies to target and drive the enemy from its positions, including those in third countries. Today, in that same spirit, we are launching an economic onslaught against Iran's financial connections around the globe. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. Iran's fanatics devote themselves to death to America and seek nuclear weapons to do just that. They have murdered and maimed more of our citizens and service members than any other terrorist regime on earth. And they have been at war against America, their neighbors in the Gulf, and much of the world for 47 years. President Trump has taken action that his predecessors have long deferred. And under his leadership, America is no longer managing the Iranian threat. We are ending it. Our great armed forces have laid the groundwork for achieving the president's objective of preventing Iran from ever obtaining nuclear weapons. They have shown America's resolve to finally end this threat. And the strength of America's economy under President Trump allows us to wage this sustained financial operation alongside the might of our military. Iran now faces a very clear choice with only two paths before them: complete global isolation and a subsistence economy, or a path back to normalcy with an opportunity to rejoin the global economy. Today, we are launching Operation Economic Outcast to foreclose every other option available to the Iranian regime. Treasury has mapped every node, every facilitator, and every network that Iran has used to smuggle oil and evade sanctions. Beginning today, the actions of Treasury and other agencies will tighten the noose and block every potential source of revenue that funds the IRGC and the evil Iranian regime. We are enforcing a zero leakage approach. There will be no minimal breathing space for the regime to rebuild its capacity to inflict terror against America and the world. The final refuge of this regime is a mistaken conclusion of nations that still finance the Iranian threat in the hopes of evading it. It is no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this conflict. Countries cannot claim they are blind to enabling this activity. Iran's enablers purchase, transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and overland transits. They condone illicit use of their banks, all the while concealing the extent of their complicity. The president is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime. We are already seeing results. Over the weekend, comments from Iranian leadership clearly acknowledged the effect of this campaign, and nations that facilitate any interactions with the regime should quickly heed our message. Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime. Teams from Treasury, State, and the U.S. military are now meeting with their global counterparts to tell them that the United States expects action. Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities. For example, every branch of Bank Melay must be shuttered and dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar system. The clock just started ticking. The new sectoral sanctions determinations issued today target 5 of Iran's most vital lifelines that it exploits in other countries: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping. These measures broaden secondary sanctions risk for anyone foolish enough to continue conducting business with this regime, and will accelerate the speed with which we pursue them. As I speak, Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control is also sanctioning over 60 entities, individuals, and vessels around the world that enable the Iranian regime to procure illicit nuclear and missile technology, conduct cyber operations, and generate oil revenue. This is a sustained campaign to collapse every last option for Iran. Let there be no ambiguity as to the position of the United States. An economic engagement of any kind with this murderous regime will expose those responsible to the full reach of American power. For decades, this regime has drawn strength from a calculus that regards Iranian retaliation as certain and American enforcement as negotiable. Under President Trump, that era is over. To the ordinary soldiers supporting this regime, as more and more of your paychecks stop or are supposedly just delayed, ask whether your commanders are leading your country to triumph or to ruin. And recall that the Berlin Wall fell when ordinary soldiers decided not to shoot at their own people. And to those who enable Tehran, do not discount the cost of testing Washington's resolve. No nation should expect to enjoy the rewards of our system while helping those who seek to destroy it. It is now a time for world leaders to make a decision between prosperity and isolation, peace and terror, America and Iran. The campaign we begin today will gather force with every day that follows, and it will not end until this regime stands alone. With that, I welcome your questions. David from Reuters.
Hi, thanks, Secretary. One of the most powerful tools you have at your disposal is the ability to impose secondary sanctions on banks and financial institutions that facilitate transactions for Iran. Chinese banks have often been talked about being targeted, but we don't see any of those institutions targeted here. Is that something that is coming in this campaign, or is the very delicate trade truce with China something that could prohibit you from going that far and taking that very big step?
We want to make clear here today that no one is above the reach of U.S. sanctions, that if they facilitate transactions and are part of the ecosystem that turns Iranian oil into money, into repression, they will be targeted. We find that the best way to engage with countries is through quiet diplomacy, and we are level setting with every country to tell them our expectations. We know who they are, they know who they are, so when the hammer of U.S. Treasury actions falls upon them, they will have no one to blame but themselves. So, Richard from CBS.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. You said the president is calling world leaders with specific asks and that there is a defined timeline. Who is he calling and what are the asks?
We're not going to name names, that we've already seen some results, and that I am confident the president, as you all know, is quite persuasive, and we are following his calls up with calls from visits and calls from the State Department and from the U.S. Treasury, expecting them, or telling the leaders, the countries, and the entities exactly what we expect and the timelines. And I would expect that very quickly if they do not respond, then you will see the ramifications of their actions.
Can you say how far the timelines are?
Again, I'm not going to set timelines, but we do not have infinite patience here. Jennifer?
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Jennifer Schonberger with Yahoo Finance. You just said moments ago that no one is above U.S. sanctions. What specific secondary sanctions or penalties is Treasury prepared to levy against Chinese banks and shipping firms if they do not comply? And then secondly, as you look to take these unprecedented sanctions, you've also said that as the Iran conflict fades and oil prices recede, that will help bring down long-term bond yields. In the meantime, you have mentioned your toolkit, and I'm curious if you are looking at reducing auction sizes for longer-term dated Treasury debt going forward, and what other actions you may consider from that toolkit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
well, why don't we work backwards? We issued the quarterly refunding announcement 2.5 weeks ago. We are going to continue with our regular program of auctions, so you will be hearing from us again at the beginning of next quarter. In terms of, as I said, every country, every entity should know that they should be prepared to face U.S. sanctions. And no one is above this. We are going to hold everyone accountable, and this is economic asphyxiation of this regime. And Jennifer, as I said, no one should test our resolve. So, Josh from New York Post.
You said you weren't going to name names, but there's been some reports that the United Arab Emirates is among some of the first nations to take seriously these words from the United States to cut off all business interactions with Iran. Is UAE leading the way in this respect?
I would think that the actions that they took last week were not coincident, but likely causal. And I would expect that we would see a broad array of countries taking similar actions as we continue our engagement. The UAE have been very good partners and have taken the brunt of the Iranian attacks in the Gulf. And what have these countries gotten over the years from appeasing Iran? They were subject to violent attacks. While we were bombing Iran, they were bombing them. So it shows that with this regime, appeasement does not work. And on the other side, with this regime, trying to buy appeasement will no longer work in the eyes of the United States of America. And I want to emphasize that we are spreading out across the world as we speak, that you will see a wave of sanctions when you leave this meeting today, and you should expect that cadence to continue. And I would expect that you will see a major announcement of a financial institution being sanctioned by the end of this week. So, Samira from Sky. Yep. No. No. Are you? No. I'm looking for Samira from Sky. No. Hi.
Does the United States and President Trump still want Canada to become a state? He did say that they're getting all the benefits of being a state without being one.
I think he would like Canada to come to the table and negotiate in good faith. They were offered quite a good deal last week. They chose to reject it. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Carney rose to power on an anti-American, anti-Trump platform. I believe he was more than 20 points behind, and he seems to have gone back to his old playbook. And I think one has to ask oneself, is he trying to benefit himself, the Liberal Party, or the Canadian people? because they were offered a very good job. So, yep, you.
Thank you to Secretary Bessent. If I could shift to bond yields quickly. We saw them tick down today after some turbulence and going up last week. Can you tell us if there's any possibility that there will be more bond buybacks anytime soon?
Again, we haven't bought a single bond yet. The next time we have an operation is September 9th. So we will see on September 9th. All right. One more. Let's see. You in the front.
You described this as an economic D-Day, but D-Day wasn't a threat of an invasion, and the U.S. didn't give a timeline to Germany. So why not impose the sanctions today?
Well, we are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? We believe that it is important to level set and give people a cure period, but they should know that that will move very quickly and that we are serious. Secondary sanctions are a very powerful tool, and we here at Treasury, this is Jean Lang, the acting undersecretary for terrorism finance, and in the Terrorism Finance Department and at OFAC, the reason we are able to use secondary sanctions is because we do not take their use lightly. So we believe that a warning shot and a level set of expectations is appropriate. And if people do not want to meet our expectations, then we expect, and they should expect, that they will leave the dollar system. Okay? Thank you all.
You've been listening to Treasury Secretary there, Scott Bessent, announcing sanctions against Iran. These would also affect countries that do trade with Iran. I want to go back now to CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro for much more about this. Aaron, for those who are just joining us right now, what are your takeaways from what we heard there from Bessent?
Mugo, this is being called Operation Economic Outcast, and it had a lot of language, at least from the Treasury Secretary there in that presser, being adamant that countries that do business with Iran, that help facilitate the retrieval of their oil revenue, either through free trade zones or exchange houses, will be punished by the American economy, by secondary sanctions. We're still ticking through some of the details here, but in the press release, they announced 60 targets of sanctions of those that assist Iran's digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping sectors. He made sure to emphasize that the Treasury has pinpointed every way that Iran has historically evaded U.S. sanctions in the past using other countries, and that they're looking to stop that. He said at one point that the U.S. will be enforcing a, quote, zero leakage approach. He said it is, quote, no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this country, referring to Iran. He said that both the Treasury Department as well as the U.S. military, as well as the White House are getting involved here with President Trump making calls to leaders of certain countries to inform them of potential secondary sanctions that could be applied to them should they not comply with what the White House is looking to do here. He made sure to note that every country gets a timeline for when they have a deadline to stop any type of financial interaction with Iran, but he did not specify what that timeline looks like for each country, nor did he specify what foreign leaders President Trump called today, as he was asked and pressed by our colleague Richard Escobedo to do. So we'll get more details here. But one last thing to know, the reporter asked, is China exempt from all of this since they were not explicitly listed in that press release? And he said no. He said, quote, no one is above the reach of U.S. sanctions. The best way to engage with countries is through quiet diplomacy. But, quote, if a country does bear the brunt of a secondary sanction, quote, they will have no one to blame but themselves.
All right, Aaron Navarro at the White House for us today. Thank you so much. Let's go live now to CBS News business contributor Javier David. Javier, thank you for your time. So Secretary Bessent is calling this an economic onslaught against Iran. I think it's important to note there when he talks about sanctions against other countries that continue to do business with Iran, he said there is no timeline. From your opinion here, what do you think all of this could ultimately look like?
Well, look, these were very strong words from the secretary. He used the words economic asphyxiation and no one should test our resolves. This is really meant to be a pivot away from the phase of dropping intended target is Iran, but it's also allies and trading partners of the country. So broadly speaking, sanctions regimes are meant to hit a country in a way that forces them to liquidate dollar-denominated assets. It squeezes them financially, and they need to have enough cash on hand in order to sort of hedge against further freezes. But this move at this particular juncture is a very kind of perilous one for the United States. This is a move that could ricochet across Iran's largest trading partners. Those include China, Turkey, and India. And I think this is why the secretary was saying there's no timeline. They want to sort of leverage diplomacy as best as they can. They're not tipping their hands as to who they're talking to, but it's pretty clear that some of the bigger countries involved here, they're trying to give them an opportunity to sort of get ahead of it before they get squeezed. And, again, sanctions here aren't the only variable at play. You have the Washington running deficits, endless deficits that it needs to finance with more debt. We have the most aggressive tariff regime in place in a century, and now we just announced 50% tariffs against China, on Canada rather. So all of this is coming at a time when the U.S. needs as many buyers of its debt as it can get, and it needs a stable economic environment in order to sort of bolster investor confidence.
Yeah, when it comes to this war with Iran, the president had said it was only going to take about 4 weeks. Now we're months in. So you see this as the beginning of a new phase in this conflict. And what is the message to countries that continue to do business with Iran?
Well, I mean, the message here is, the U.S. is, as the Treasury Secretary said, they're willing to, no one should test the resolve. We're going to use all the toolbooks in our toolkits, so to speak. But, you have this poisonous environment. You have a lot going on. Every escalation basically nudges another cohort of foreign holders to diversify away from the dollar system. That heaps more structural pressure on U.S. assets. It bolsters demand for things like gold, silver, Bitcoin. This is an environment that we call in markets dollar debasement. And it couldn't be coming at a worse time because, again, the Treasury is really actively trying to contain all this selling pressure that's driving up interest rates on long-term debt.
Javier, I just want to make sure I'm getting your point here correctly. You're saying this is not just going to affect Iran, it's also going to affect the United States.
There are very real sort of ramifications, repercussions, whatever you want to call them, but the U.S. really needs to tread carefully because people are starting to question whether or not the U.S. is really the sort of safe haven that it used to be. And these sorts of actions are something that basically calls more questions onto whether or not Washington is a reliable partner and whether dollar-denominated assets are as liquid or as safe as they used to be.
Wow. Javier David, thank you for your insight today. I appreciate it. And now I want to bring in CBS News Middle East contributor Courtney Kealy. Courtney, thanks for your time. So your reaction to what we just heard there from Secretary Bessent?
Well, really a war of words. It's the U.S. versus Iran. That was his clear context. And he talked about the asphyxiation of Iran's economy. These were words of war against the economy, but also just against the regime. And what's happening right now in Iran is what I'm hearing is now you have the newly appointed hardcore head of the military, head of the IRGC, the new national security chief, in alignment with the foreign minister's office. They both agree that that Iran's hands are not tied, that they will take this seriously. They've also started their own kind of authority over the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, and they are still saying that only 20 ships have gone through this week. So they're actually exerting, in their own words, that they control it. But meanwhile, the questions about China really stood out because the U.S. has already put sanctions on 40 Chinese shippers, and China still imports about 80% of Iranian oil exports. So this was a big question, and the Treasury Secretary did not answer it. We don't know what this means for the relationships between the U.S. and China. And this is kind of the spillover effect we've talked about. You don't want to see other countries get involved in this conflict, and we've seen it spill over into other countries. Iran is already saying countries like Saudi Arabia or South Korea and the Emirates need to not go along with the U.S. So while the U.S. is saying it's us or them, so are the Iranians. And it really depends on what we see, what the timeline is. We don't know there's a timeline in terms of this week or next week. Bessent did say that it won't go on forever, but they don't have a timeline, who they're talking to, or any real quotes. So keep an eye on the Saudis, the Chinese, the Emiratis, and the South Koreans. That's been playing over this week, but also came from last week. The Treasury Secretary put an op-ed into the Financial Times talking about the dawn of today, these new extreme financial sanctions. And so are we looking at a further escalation in terms of economic warfare that could really do damage to a country that's already in dire economic straits? Or are we talking about back to the negotiating table? Because the Pakistani army chief, the field army chief, is there now. And he was a main person in getting both sides to the table to get to this MOU that broke apart just last week, but had been started in June. The Pakistanis are involved. We're going to have to wait and see who they meet in Iran today and whether they're really meeting with these newly emboldened, powerful IRGC folks, national security folks that answer to Mojtaba Khomeini, the new supreme leader.
So much to pay attention to on this one. Courtney, Kealy, thank you.